Okay, so today's DAF is DAF Ayin Zayin. We're just going to start with the last line on the bottom of Ayin Vav and Beis. So we had in the Mishnah, really the Gemara, the Brisa put on Machlokes that the Rabbi allowed this woman to get married in a case when he says, so Amar Rabbi, Hakol Moedim, everybody agrees, both the Tana of our Mishnah and the Rabbi Seinu, that when the sun comes out of its pouch, meaning when the sun rises in the morning, he means to say that when the sun actually comes out, then the divorce does not take effect until the morning. And if you were to pass away during the night, that would be considered a get after Misa. In the case of Almanas, if he said, as long as he was stipulating something, that as long as the sun comes out in the morning, he meant to say that she should be divorced right now, with the Tanai that the sun rises the next morning. Whoever says Almanas, it's considered he's saying he wants the divorce to be chal right now. They don't argue elo be'im teitze. In the case of when he says im teitze, if the sun comes out. Mar savar la Rabbi Yosi, the Rabbi Seinu hold like Rabbi Yosi the Amr, that he says zman shtar mechiach halav, that the zman of the shtar proves what his real intent was, and his intent was that it should be at night. It's as if he said now that I die, or today if he dies. So that's the same halacha if you say im meisi. Mar the Tanakama Mishnah does not hold like Rabbi Yosi, and therefore it's as if he said im meisi by itself, and he did not make any stipulation. The Gemara continues. The Mishnah said in a case of kisvu get v'tnu le'ishti, you should write a get and give it to his wife. If he doesn't come from now until Yud Beis Chodesh. Omler Rav Yemar le Rav Ashi. Rav Yemar says to Rav Ashi, Leima kasav Rav Yosi, get kasav get al tanai kosher. Means there's a machlokes in the Mishnah. In the case when he says kisu v'tnu get leishti, and so the Tanakama said it's not a kosher get. Rav Yosi held it was a good get. So Rav Ashi is saying, Lema kasav Rav Yosi, kasav get al tanai kosher. That any time you make a tanai in the actual writing of a get, meaning obviously in the giving of a get, if you made a tanai that there has to be a certain time period passed before you can give the get, and the Eidim or the Shlichim go and give the get prior to that tanai being fulfilled, it would not be kosher. But the question was, if you made a stipulation in the writing of the get also, and they did not listen to your stipulation, they wrote it prior to the time period passed, would that be considered a kosher get? So the Havmin is saying that Rabbi Yosi would hold that since he said kisvu v'tunu, even though he said after 12 months, but they wrote it before the 12 months passed, so they say maybe a stipulation in the writing would not be a problem and you could ignore what he said. And so the Gemara, really, that's really going to be possible also in the writing. The Shani Hacha, over here it's different. He said, he first said kisvu v'tunu. He didn't say if I don't come, write it. He says imloi basi kisu v'tunu. He said kisu v'tunu imloi basi. He said write it and then give it if I don't come. Hachikamer. This is what he meant to say. Kisu miachshav. Write it now. V'tunu imloi basi. And we're splitting up his words. And he says and give it if I don't come. So there was no stipulation in the actual writing. The Rabbanan don't differentiate between the two cases whether or not he said imloi basi if he first prefaced his to write it with saying that if I don't come, or if he said it afterwards. Now the Gemara is going to speak about in a case where a person said that I should give the get if I don't come after a certain period of time. How much time buffer do we give him, or how much time does he really imply? This case is Tamar Rabbanon la'achar Shavua. He said, "I'm going to give the get if I don't come after Shavua, which means after the Shemitah cycle." So he was standing at any point during the Shemitah cycle. It makes no difference if he's close to the Shemitah or at the beginning of the Shemitah. He said, "If I don't come after the Shemitah." So how much time after that do we give him, which is included in after the Shemitah? Says the Gemara Shana, we give him an additional year. The entire 8th year we give him, and you don't give the get till then. La'achar Shana, if he says I'm going to come by the end of this year, Chodesh, we give him an additional month. La'achar Chodesh, he says I'm going to come at the end of this month. Shabbos, we give him one more week. La'achar Shabbos Mai. But if he says I'm going to come at the end of Shabbos, how many days after Shabbos do we give him? Yosef Rav Zeva Kamed Rav Asi. Rav Zeva sat by Rav Asi, V'amri law, some say Rav Asi Kamed Rav Yochanan. V'ka'amar, he said, Chad v'Shabba, v'trei v'tlasa, basar Shabbasa. Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday all are considered part of the previous Shabbos. Arba v'chamisha mali Shabbata, kamei Shabba. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday are all going to the next week's Shabbos. So therefore, that would imply that if he says, I'm coming after Shabbos, we would give him Sunday, Monday, Tuesday to still come before we would give the get.
That's a din in Odal, too.
Right. That's the find the halacha applies in other places also. Right. Says the Gemara Tanya, Rabbi Omer la'achar regel shloshim yom. Rabbi said that if a person says, I'm going to come after Yom Tif, we give him additional 30 days. Nafik Rabbi Chia darsha mishmei de Rabbi v'kalsua. So Rabbi Chia went out and publicized halacha, and he publicized it in the name of Rabbi. V'kalsua, they praised him. Why did they praise him? Because he was darshaning it in the name of a yachid, in someone who is a single, and you don't pass like a yachid. Then he later on mishmei de Rabbim, he darshaned it mishmei de Rabbim. V'lo kalsua, they did not praise him. Obviously from there we see that you did not pass like this halacha of Rabbi, that you give, if a person says, I'm going to come at the end of, if I don't come at the end of after Yom Tov, if you give him another 30 days, we do not pass like that halacha. Now, exactly what we pass and what the halacha is, how many days after, it's a big machlokes Rishonim. Some Rishonim say 15 days. It's big machlokes exactly what that zman is, but it's definitely not 30.
It's very hard to understand this in light of the other Gemaras that we had a long time ago. When the guy says, I'm coming by 5 o'clock. And
right.
He misses the boat, or the bridge breaks. He says, I'm here. He says, no, you're not here, forget it. So
right.
And here you're giving him 2 weeks leeway.
Right, so I had the same problem, and I looked into it, and it's, because the reason is he's saying, if I don't come by the end of Shemitah, so what constitutes Shemitah? We're not really giving a buffer zone. I sort of said it not properly. We're not really giving a buffer zone. The question is, what does his implications mean? When he says at the end of Shabbos, if I come after Chodesh, after a month, meaning it's not saying 30 days. Chodesh doesn't mean 30 days. If he's in the first of the month, then it would be 30 days. If it's in the 25th of the month, it would still imply that only 5 days more.
The definition of the word he used, as opposed to I'm coming by 5 o'clock.
Right. If he says I'm coming in 30 days, so 30 days, 30 days is 30 days. If he says I'm coming at the end of the Shemitah cycle, so what constitutes the end of the Shemitah cycle? Right.
Doesn't we could do like paros? In other words, there's a month for each particular vegetable, each particular fruit.
Right.
By that point, it's done, and then Shemitah's over for that. After
no, it's probably with Rosh Hashanah over here.
By Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah, yeah. Says the Mishnah, Hazar gel ishta, if someone throws a get to his wife, v'hi b'seich beisa, and she is in her house, oy b'seich chatzera, or in her chatzer, harizu mugrashas, she's considered divorced. The Gemara is going to explain why it says she is inside her rishus. Zarku la b'seich beisa, if he threw it to her when she was inside his house, oy b'seich chatzera, or inside his house, afilu hu, or he, ima b'mita, even if she is with him in the bed, eina mugrashas, she's not considered mugrashas. If she threw it into her lap or into her bag that she had with her, then she is divorced. And the Mishnah is discussing that we have what's called kini chatzer, that if it's in your rishus, it also is kind of for you. So therefore, throwing a get into a woman's rishus will constitute a divorce. Says the Gemara, how do we know that a chatzar could be kind of for a woman and she could be divorced with this? The Tana Rabbanon, v'nasan biyada. The pasuk says v'nasan biyada. You should give it to her in her hand. Ainli el yada. That from there we only know her hand. Gaga chatzar v'charfifa minayin. Her roof or her chatzar or her karf, some sort of other rishus. How do we know that would be you would be able to throw a get in there? Tamaloimer v'nasan. It says v'nasan mikol makom. Any giving would constitute giving, and that would be good. V'tanya mihachi, we learned a Raizel, which has a similar drasha. Gabi ganef. The pasuk says yadai. It says if you find the ganef that he stole it, he's holding it in his hand. Ainli el yadai. So that we only know from there that if he stole it with his hand. Gaga chatzer v'chafifa minayin. How do we know if he stole it using any other rishus? That means it came into his rishus and he wanted to be kainit with his kinyan chatzer. Some other person's object walked into his rishus, and he has das to be kainit that and steal it. How do we know that constitutes stealing? Anywhere that it's found, the pasuk says himatzik tamatzei. Anywhere where it's found, we'll consider it stealing. But tzricha, we need both cases, the cases of get and the case of ganef. The Ashmin and get, if it will only tell us to be marbe and include those other reshuyas. By get, mishum debal karcha megarsha. A woman is able to be divorced against her will. If the man wants to force her and stuff the get into her hand, he has the ability. So therefore, we would think that by other reshuyas, the woman's other reshus, if the husband would just throw it into her backyard or her house, then she would be divorced. But a ganef who does not have the ability to steal bar karche, that means if I take someone else's object and throw it into my friend's reshus, then he of course is not considered a robber. He has not stolen that until he has das. So kamash malon, that he has the ability to steal it if he just has das for it, and he doesn't have to actually do any action to it. He doesn't have to do mishicha to it. If we would only say the case of Ganev, Mishum de Kanse, Rachmana. We thought that since he's doing an improper act, he's stealing something, so the Rabbanon would kanas, the Torah is giving him a kanas, that such a case is also considered stealing. But get, we would not think that, so therefore we need both cases. So ask the Gemara a question. How does her property have the ability to be kind of her? The halacha is whatever a woman acquires, her husband really acquires. So we're talking about over here a property of nichse muluk. So it's really her. Previously it was her property; she owned it. They got married. He now eats the peiros. So in such a case, how could she be kind of the husband has the rights to the field now? She doesn't have the rights to the field. He writes to her, he stipulates that he does not want this field to have anything to do with it. He doesn't want to have any he's not going to get the pay, he's not going to get anything from it. So therefore it still remains her property and she has all the rights to it. Ask the Gemara, if he would write such a thing, would that help? But Tanya will enter the Brisa. If someone tells his friend, Din vidvarim, ainli al sadazu, I don't have anything to do with this sada. Vainly asik ba, viadim misulaka semeno, or I have nothing to do with it, or my hand is removed from it. Lo yamar klum. That's not considered anything, because something which you own, in order for you to remove your ownership from it, you either have to give it to somebody else, or maybe you could mafker it. But you can't just say I have nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it does not constitute any transfer of ownership. That's nothing to do with it. So how could this man say din v'dvarim ainli b'nechasayich, that I don't have anything to do with your property? Answer the Gemara, Amri debei Rabbi Yanai, because of love oida arusa. He writes this to her when she's still on arusa, they're still engaged, and therefore he has the ability to make this tonight because he doesn't yet own it. Rav Kahana, the Amar of Kahana, nachla b'lo yilad mimakam acher adam masna lesh lo yirshena. Rav Kahana says that any time you have a property or present coming from you from somewhere else, I mean, it's not a Yerusha D'Oraisa that's from your parents, that would be halachically you would get it. Something which is a present someone else is giving to you, so you could say I don't want it, and you're not required to get something against your will. So therefore, if he stipulates when they're arusa that I don't want to get it, therefore he's not kind it, and therefore the woman still has the ownership of this property. If a person says, I don't want this takanas chachamim, I have the ability to, he has the ability to not want it, meaning even though it's not takanas chachamim, the chachamim gave it to him, he can say, I'm not interested in the takanas chachamim. So Rava said this is somewhere else, but we're using Rava to apply it to our case. What was the case that Rava said it in? A woman has the ability to tell her husband, I do not want to, don't feed me, and I don't want to work for you. Don't take my ma'aseh yadayim. And therefore, since she has that ability, so too over here, he could also stipulate against the takas chachamim that he's not interested in this karka. Says the Gemara, so Rava asks, Rava Omar Oto Yoda Miloi Kanyala Labal. A woman's hand is also kind to the Baal. Meaning, what's the Gemara's question of Chatzeira, the Masha Kansi Shekana Baila? Her hand is also owned by the Baal. Whatever she's kind of, the Baal also gets. So how is a woman able to get divorced when you give it to her in her hand? Says Rabbi, there's a halacha called Gita V'yada Ban Kechad. Simultaneously, when she acquires her get, she acquires her ability to be kind. She's being divorced. She's being divorced from her husband. So at that same instance that she gets the get, she gets her own yad to be able to acquire it. So therefore, there's no question of the Gemara of Masha Kansi Shekana Baila. So too, by a property, you say Gita v'chatzeira, her hand, her get and her chatzir come together. Ravina asked Rashi, Rava Yad Isha Kakashile. Rava had a question about Yad Isha. He was questionable how a woman has an ability to be kind of her own get in her own hand. We understand that the woman's hand is kind of to the Baal in regard to the Maisi Yadayim, that he gets any revenue that she may produce. Yad Gufa Mi Kanila, he doesn't own the actual hand, and the hand is still owned by the woman. So in such a case, by the woman's hand, of course she can get her own. She can acquire a get in her own hand. That she owns her own hand. Whereas a chatzar is not necessarily really owned by her, since the husband has the payers. He sort of like a renter.
Is it only a temporary that he has it? I mean, he has it only until they're divorced.
True, but at this point, he owns it.
The same thing like the yad. I mean,
what are you asking about, the yad or the chatzar?
Chatzar.
He does, but he almost buys like a renter, and he has the rishus.
I'm saying, as soon as he gives the get, the chatzar returns to her, right?
Yeah, but the question is, you're throwing into someone's chatzar which is not yours. That's gittul chatzer g'ban kachad. That's the svar of gittul chatzer g'ban kachad. That simultaneously happens. Uh-huh. That's true. But the question was, he seems to he brings a raya from her hand, right? From a yada. Right. So we can understand gitav chatzer ban kachad. That's fine. The question is, why are you bringing a raya from her hand? Rabba's answer was, he says, Atu yada milay kanya, he brings a raya from her hand, just like her hand could be kind of so to her chatzar could be kind of. The question is, you can't bring a raya from her hand. Her hand is simple. Right. Why it works. The chatzar may be a question. You can't bring a raya from the hand. So he says, Rava yata evet kakashale. Rava really was shver from a yad evet. Lemand Amr b'shtar aydei atzmai. According to the Mand Amr that holds that a slave has the ability to become freed with a shtar and being kind in himself, his own hand being kind, and that a yad evet is for sure kaina to his master. It's owned by the master. So in such a case, how does this evet have an ability to be kaina his shtar? Yad evet ki Rabbi damya. Ela gitav yadei ban kechad. So over there we have to say the svara called gitav yadei ban kechad, that the evet's hand comes to him at the same time as his freedom. So to over here, her chatzar, her property, and her divorce comes simultaneously. Says the Gemara, there was a story of this person who was sick. The kasev lo gitel dvisu bahadi pani demaili shabata. He wrote a get for his wife on Erev Shabbos. And he didn't have time to give it to her before Shabbos started. The next day he got very, very sick, and they were afraid he was going to die. And he was concerned that she was going to fall to a yavam, and she didn't want her to do that, so he wanted her to be able to get divorced. Also came to Rava. So they came to Rava to ask Rava the Shaila, what should they do? They want to give this get to her. And what should they do? And Rashi says the reason why they couldn't give the get on Shabbos is because the get is muktzah. Other Rishonim learned that there was a Rishus Rabbim in between. That he couldn't get out of his bed, and he was sick there, and the get was across the street. There's no Erev, there's a Rishus Rabbim, so he couldn't make an Erev, and there was no way to get that get from him to her. That was how Rishonim learned. Omer lahu. So Rabbi told him, Zilu Amrule, go tell him, lik this shchivmra, likni niale lahu duchte, diyasav begita. He should be makne the room where the get is sitting in his property to the woman. V'tezel ihi v'tichoid v'tiftach, and she should go and close and open the door, and there should be kind of the room. V'tachzik bay, and she should be kind in the room. The Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Na'al geder paratz kolshu hariz chazaka. If you break down or you make a wall at any point around the chatzar, it's a chazaka. That's a kinyan chatzar, and you could acquire the property. And by the second she acquires the property with the get inside, she gets divorced. Rav Elish asked Rava, you can't, it's not going to help you anything, because the second she's kind of the room, her husband really is kind of the room back right again. So you're not gaining anything. You have still a problem. That's not a good way to divorce her. He was embarrassed and he was quiet. Rava didn't have what to answer. At the end, it was Nizgala that the story that they came to ask Rav the Shaila, she was really only an Arusa, she was only engaged. She was not really married. So Rava says to him, if you're going to say, even if you're going to tell me this halacha is true by a married woman, a fully married woman, by an arusa, you're going to say the same halacha? Arusa, we don't say masha kansi shekana baila. Then Rava afterwards said, Loishna Arusa, Loishna Arusua. There's no difference whether or not she was an Arusa or she was an Asua. Kita v'chatzer ban ke'achad. Her hand, her chatzer, her property, and her get come together. Ask the Gemara of Amar Rava Mi'ikara. Rava already said this halacha. Why? If he already said the halacha, so why was he even embarrassed? Right away when Rav Elish asked him the question, he should have immediately said, Kita v'chatzer ban ke'achad. Why did he get embarrassed and then only come up later on with the teretz? And to the Gemara, Ki Amra Rava Ahai Ma'isa Amra. Rava said this. He was in Schadish this halacha in this place right here. That's where he said it. We had the Gemara earlier, but the Gemara switched the stories around, right? So, but this was chronologically. This story happened first. Says the Gemara. The Gemara says and goes in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that if a man throws a get to his wife and v'hi b'seich beisa, meaning he throws it to his wife in her chatzar and she's in her chatzar or she's in her house. Amar Ula. So what does it mean that she's in her house? Amar Ula. She has to be standing either right near her house or right near her chatzar in order for this kinyan to happen. Even if she is in Tveria and her chatzar is in Tzipari, or she is in Tzipari and her chatzar is in Tveria, Migareshes, that she would also be divorced. She's not required to be the next to it or inside of it. So what does it mean in the Mishnah of Katani? It says in the Mishnah that she has to be inside her chatzar, and it's the Gemara Hachi Kamar V'hi Kamisha b'seich beisa V'hi Kamisha b'seich chatzera. It's as if she is in her house, as if she's in her chatzar. The kivin the chatzar mishtameres l'daita. Since this chatzar is washed for her, it's washed for her according to her das. He migreshes. She's migreshes. Now, being washed for her das, as the Gemara is going to say later on also about this, that if lafuke a case where her eved, even though her eved is watching it, meaning you cannot give a get to a woman's eved, even though an eved is really chatzar, he has din of chatzar, and if the husband would give it to the eved, it would be considered a chatzar, and it's mishnamaris, it's watched, right? That's the one that has to be watched, meaning it can't be like your front lawn. Your front lawn would not be considered a watched area, it has to be maybe enclosed or at least secure area. But if you give it to her on Evet, even though the Evet is really watching it, and he's chatzir, so he's both a chatzir and mishtameres, he's not mishtameres l'daita. He's watching it for himself. He himself is watching it. He may, for his own, it's not really under her rishus. Maybe he listens to her and everything, but he's not really under her rishus. Whereas something which is watched under her rishus, under her guardianship, that would be fine. Says the Gemara, let us say the machlokes of Ula and Rabbi Ishia, who Ula says that she needs to be standing next to, and Rabbi Ishia does not require that. That the Ula says that Ula that requires you to be right next to your chatzir says that chatzir works with the halachic ways of yad, like her hand, and therefore she's required to be right next to it. It's Rabbi. Umar Savar Chatz Mishum Shlichus is Rabbi. Mar Savar Rabbi Ishia holds that it's work mitam shlichus. It's with a shliach. So therefore, a shliach doesn't have to be right attached to you. It could be far away from you. So therefore, it doesn't matter whether or not she is in another area or not, or next to the chatzar. Says the Gemara, Loi, the Kuli Alma Chatzim Mishum Yadis, Rabbi. Everybody agrees that the chatzar works with a svara of yad. Mar Savar Kiyadam. The Ula holds that it really looks like her hand. That it works like her hand. Ma Yada Besmucha Av Chatzar Besmucha. Just like her hand is close in proximity to her actual body, so the chatzar is required in order to work mitam yad has to be in close proximity to the isha. Vidach and Rabbi Ishia says, would you say that just like a hand is attached to a woman's body, so too a chatzar has to be attached to a woman's body? That's obviously not true. It doesn't have to be attached to the woman's body. So too, just like it doesn't have to be attached, so too we may be able to extend it even further. What does it mean? It has to be worked like a hand. Just like a hand is mishtameres l'daita, it's watched according to her das, she watches it. So too a chatzer has to be mishtameres l'daita, to exclude a case of a chatzer of a property which is not watched according to her das, which we said is a case of an eved. An eved is not watching it for her. He's watching it, not her. Says the Gemara, there was a story. A man threw a get to his wife. And they were standing in the chatzar. Now the Gemara doesn't explain what the chatzar was, whose property it was. Also, this get went and rolled on top of a board of some sort of piece of wood, some sort of board. Omer of Yosef. So the question was whether or not she's divorced when it landed on this board. Omer of Yosef, Chazinon, ihave arba amos l'arba amos. We have to see and check out this board. If this board is 4 amos by 4 amos, and if it is, then it's considered its own entity, it's its own rishus, and therefore she's not divorced. And if it's not, it's less than 4 by 4 amos, then it's not its own rishus, and it's bottled to the chatzir, and considered the chatzir. And then she would be divorced. Ask the Gemara, what are we talking about? If we're talking about her own chatzir, even if this board was dalat amos by dalat amos, and it is its own rishus, but they're all within her own rishus. So who cares? It's in her own rishus. Both of them, whether it's on the floor, whether it's on this board, they're all in her rishus. So she would be divorced regardless. Says the Gemara, Elav Chatzadi Day.
Skip a line there. Probably Rishut al Nafshi.
I think I read it. I can go back to Ramon.
If it's our Bamar,
what if neither of them own the board? It's there for somebody else.
I'm sorry, is this
what if neither one of them own the board?
Well, no, but still, it's in your own rishus. The area is kind of for you.
You're overlooking it. Maybe it's storing for somebody.
Storing the board for somebody else, but you still be kind of within kinyan chashuv, with that kinyan aver. You're saying if it's someone else's board by 4, you still own the airspace, I think.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure.
Sorry.
I'll go back to it.
It's okay.
If it's 4 by 4, then it makes its own rishus, counts its own rishus. And if it's less than 4 by 4, it would be its own. It would be one rishus, and it wouldn't be a problem. But ma'askin, what are we talking about? If it's her own chatzer, ki havi dalat amos, my havi. If it would be 4 by 4, what's the difference? Doesn't matter because she owns everything. It has to be talking about it's his property. Says the Gemara, ki loy havi arba amos my havi. Even if this board would be less than 4 by 4, it's still his own property. So you can't divorce a woman in your own property. At least if it's going to land on the floor, if you give it to her, it'll be fine. And so loy tzricha de ashlo makom. He rented her, he lent her the area that she should be able to be kaina in this area. He lent her this area that she's going to be standing on. She should be hers, and she would have the ability to be kaina in this area. So it says the chad makom mushli inish trei makom is loy mushli inish. One area a person lends someone else. 2 areas a person doesn't lend it. So that means if in this area that I lent you there is a secondary area, that area I didn't have any das to actually lend it to you. But if it was one area, then that I lent to you. I didn't lend you the second area. So therefore, if the board is more than 4 by 4 and it has its din of its own rishos, then I didn't lend you the area of the board. I only lend you the area of the ground. Whereas if the board is less than 4 by 4, it's considered one area, and everything is included in the lending. Says that which we said if the board was less than 4, it does not consider what?
10.
No, that which we said that if the board was less than 4, that it would be considered one area. That's if this board was not more than 10 tefachim high. But if this board, even though it was less than 4 amos by 4 amos wide, but it was more than 10 amos tall, it would still be considered its own area, and she still would not be able to divorce if it fell in that area. And that we didn't say that even if this board was either higher than 10 or less than 4, that it didn't have Shem Lai, it wasn't called something else. But let's say it was called, let's say you built something as a platform and you call it a platform and you know it's clearly defined as a different area, then it wouldn't be good. It has a different name. Even though it's not 10 high, and even though it's not 4 wide, it still would be considered its own rishus to itself.
Correct.